"Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a socialist," said the son. "You can't do both," answered Dad. No one makes the argument of socialism being an efficient way to organize things from an economical standpoint. Nevertheless, we are moving in a direction of more government control and socialist programs. Germany, which after World War II experienced all the horrors of war and Nazi control, saw an economic rise from capitalism. And even at the time, you still find a large number of intellectuals who are proponents of collectivism and argue against capitalism. The question is, why? What produces this attitude against capitalism and pro-collectivism? The answer is a combination of supposed emphasis on moral values, which are individual, and misunderstanding between moral values and economic systems. Moral values is what each of us holds true. Socialism, capitalism, central planning are means and not ends. We must look at the results of each system and not at their proponents or their intentions. Socialism, which means government ownership and operation of means of production, can appeal to fine, noble people because of supposed objectives of socialism, especially those that seem to give greater equality and social justice. And those are great objectives, and it is logical that they would appeal to people with goodwill. But we must ask if the system produces the desired results, and once we take a look, it is very clear that they do not. Where do we have the greatest inequality? Where is the social injustice the greatest? Clearly, it is where you have central control. The degree of social injustice in Russia or China is of a different magnitude than in the Western countries where we take freedom for granted. People are sent to prison for writing a book, murdered for opposition to the government, or take a look at the genocide against Uyghurs happening in China right now. In Soviet Union, most goods were not for sale and were only available to the members of the Politburo. You have an example of inequality in the immediate, literal sense. Small select group of people that have access to all pleasures of life and large masses with very low standard of living. Capitalism, on the other hand, is a system of organization that relies on private property and voluntary exchange. People are driven away because they think it emphasizes self-interest in the narrow, selfish way. They are repelled by the idea that people are pursuing their own interest rather than some broader interest. Yet, if you look at the results, it is clear that in places where capitalism has prevailed for a long period of time, you have both freedom and prosperity. It is not perfect, but no system is. Perfection is not for this world. But few would deny that US and Western Europe have much greater degree of freedom on the individual level, more social justice, and less inequality than most other parts of the world. We must understand that the fundamental moral value is not to do good to others, whether they want it or not. It's not to do good to others as you see their good, neither it is to force someone to do good. The fundamental value in relations amongst people is to respect the dignity and the individuality of fellow men and women. Treat them not as objects to be manipulated for purposes in accordance with your values, but as people with their own rights and values. People to be persuaded, not forced. In each system, whether socialism or capitalism, people act in their self-interest. The self-interest of a US worker is not to get fired. The self-interest of a Soviet worker used to be not getting fired at. Government policies is what made the self-interest different in each case. More importantly, when we move away from voluntary cooperation and try to use force, the bad moral value of force triumphs over good intentions. The essential notion of capitalism is voluntary cooperation, while the fundamental notion of socialism is force. When you try to do good with other people's money, you must first take them away. You would not pay 1/3 of your income or more in taxes to the government if there were no legal consequences, would you? But even then, Let's assume for a moment that people in power are trying to do good with our money. Let's not question their intentions. But we must remember a line from a letter of Lord Acton. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. People who have good intentions are themselves corrupted, and if they are not, they are replaced with the people with bad intentions, who are more efficient at use of force. Most harm has been done by those who are absolutely convinced in the purity of their intentions. Mussolini, who did not really believe in what he was doing, started as a socialist, became a fascist, and was willing to go where they would bribe him the most. As a result, there were some protections against his rule, while Hitler was a sincere fanatic, and thus did far greater harm. Have you asked yourself, why is it that we are seeing the moral climate going down? Lack of civil discussions amongst people, respect for property, worse discipline in schools. Such decline is attributed to the shift in beliefs from individual responsibility to a belief of social responsibility. Why should we respect something that belongs to everyone? Why should I improve if I'm not responsible for my behavior? There is always a tendency to excuse the people who are harmed. The stormers of the United States Capitol or the violent members of Black Lives Matter did not riot because they lacked responsibility. This is what society did to them. But if that's true, people who are singled out as oppressors should also be free of guilt. The argument of society did this to them excuses the victim as well as the oppressor. Additional reasons that contribute to the decline in moral climate are bad economic laws. We made immoral behavior much more profitable. In the 1800s, Britain was considered a nation with a large number of criminals. In the 1900s, it was famous for having the most law-obedient public servant who were much harder to bribe than, let's say, in Russia or United States. After the abolition of corn laws, there were no more need for smuggling. It eliminated the laws to break. Hit closer to home with prohibition. You converted law-obedient people who like to have a drink into bootleggers and criminals. Same is true with respect to weed and other drugs, which will be discussed in another video. When the only laws are those which everyone thinks are right, they have great moral force. Adam Smith, in his book Wealth of Nations, explained that individuals, each separately pursuing their own self-interest, also promote the social interest because of the mutual benefit. This goes far beyond economics. Consider the development of language. Language developed through a voluntary cooperation and free market. We found some words to be mutually advantageous to use, and we used them. Development of common law, the agreement to resolve our disputes in court. Development of sciences. We voluntarily read or watch ideas of each other, take the parts we like, ignore the parts we don't, create a better, a deeper system, which benefits all. Did Einstein come up with theory of relativity because the government told him to? What if a country has restrictions on currency exchange which stops you from buying a book from another country? Or internet restrictions which ban you from using specific websites in other countries? Are those restrictions of economic freedom or restrictions on ideas and human freedom? Capitalism is taken to be materialistic and puts money ahead of everything else. But let's look at the facts. Money might not be a very noble motive, but it is better than most. But who produced the greatest achievements of mankind? Which great play was produced by a government committee, or invention made by a government bureau? Individuals, not through government, but mostly despite government, were the creators. No society is more materialistic than the socialist society. Look back at the example of Soviet Union, where cars or luxury goods could only be purchased by high-ranked individuals and not the masses. The society where the smallest minority who does not have materialistic objectives can flourish and has the greatest degree of freedom is the society that can produce greatest human achievements. Capitalism is the only system known to us today that comes closest to doing that. And it is true, in a free market society, where everyone is free to do their own thing, It is hard to do good, since it is difficult to persuade people, but it is also hard to do bad. And maybe, in Hands of an Angel, we could have done lots of good things through central planning, but one man's good is another man's bad. The virtue of a free market stops concentration of power and prevents people from doing harm that concentrated power can do. In conclusion, socialism and capitalism are neither humane or inhumane, neither moral or immoral, but capitalism tends to develop a climate of a higher moral atmosphere of responsibility and help produce greater achievements in every realm of human understanding. I hope you're having a nice day. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos, and if you're a socialist and I happened to offend you, please leave your need for validation in the comments section below.